listening to a Frozen Truth production.
Welcome back. Tuesdays with Morris. It is another beautiful Tuesday. In fact, in this particular time, it's a windy Tuesday, as weather is going crazy in and around our great state of Texas. But we pray that you're having a blessed time wherever you are, wherever you're listening, because we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, people are watching on YouTube, and even on some TikTok shorts. You know, there's ways that people are sharing that. So wherever you're listening, if you're watching, we're glad you're looking at our beat up faces, and but if
go
you're
us
and then if you're listening, well, I'm grateful that we can just kind of help you get through your journey as you journey safely wherever you're going. And I had an idea, I had a thought about we were kind of just dancing on this understanding already of wisdom, where it comes from, where you get it, and how do you best employ it, because you had some codas that you wanted to include, because I also think that comes from, because I got this from someone else, I have to give them credit, and so I think that's a major important thought, is we didn't just get this on our own. In fact, that's why I'm here. I'm sitting with a man that quite literally helped influence and I get to sit with a source to say, I did not get this on my own. I did not just make this up. There was someone that spoke and encouraged me and showed me things. But when I say that, what comes to mind?
The first thing I thought is, I don't know how many original ideas I've ever had. You know, if I have original thoughts, I don't think it's necessarily in the thoughts themselves, but in how I reassemble them, how I present them, how I ask people to reconsider looking at them. I heard an Episcopal minister say something once that I just loved. He said, the truth is a diamond. Depending upon where we're standing, if we put a diamond way over there and shine a red light through it, it's going to look one way. If we put it right here and shine a white light through it, it's going to look another way. It doesn't change the fact that the diamond is what the diamond is.
Right.
So I thought that was a fascinating illustration of something that I already understood. Now, I don't agree with this. Socrates thought we already knew everything. We just needed somebody to wake us up. Right. I can't go there. I don't know calculus, and somebody would have to teach it to me.
I'm pretty sure everybody just leaned in. How do you wake up calculus? Talk to me.
Exactly. But yes, I think if I thought about most of the things that I have taught or used or whatever, they've come from someplace else. And most of the time, the people that I learned it from would say, yeah, well, I learned this from so-and-so.
Right.
I've always been a reader.
Yeah.
And that's crucial for so many things. It teaches you to think, because you have to imagine, even if you're reading fiction. And there's nothing, I'm not saying that to say anything pejorative about fiction. Fiction's fantastic. Some of the greatest stuff ever written has been written in fiction. But if you're reading fiction and they're describing a scene, your brain has to work to imagine that scene. And that's it. That's even in children's literature. That's inculcated by fiction from the very beginning. Imagination, being able to piece things together. Everybody listening, and you and I both, I'm sure, have had the experience of reading a book and then seeing it turned into a film and being, no, that's not the character I met in that book. One of the most extreme, I remember having read Wuthering Heights and then seeing Laurence Olivier playing Heathcliff, and I'm just like, no, not at all how I pictured the character. And I just couldn't watch it. He's a great actor. You know, I'm sure he did a fine job. I just didn't work for me from scene one. It just like, no, he's not that character.
Because you'd already done this assembling in your mind of how the character would look. I mean, I see this, the parallel I would see is that I see a box of Legos, and that same box I've used, played, assembled, and then I see my son now playing with the box of Legos, and how he imagines how putting this together is different than what I would do in putting things together, from colors to the specific Legos, 3 or 4 blocks or things like that. And sometimes I imagine that wisdom is the same, if you describe it this way, the same box of Legos, but your original thought is how you put it together. Because of the infinite numbers of ways to assemble your perspective or even your concrete finality of wisdom, of what was given to you. Because like, if we're reading the same books and we've read the same knowledge, it still can invoke different thought from different people because of how they put together what building blocks, you know, even from traumatic experiences or positive or negative experiences they had as children, or whatever foundational learning spaces, because you give Sorrows of a Young Werther to somebody and that can be interpreted 75 different ways. Meanwhile, that's why me personally, I always had a lot of pushback in my English classes, because they'll tell you, well, this is what the writer meant. And I said, that's nice. I don't care. This is what I interpreted.
Oh, you're postmodern. The postmodern dictum about any art is that once the artist puts it out there, it is no longer the property of any particular person. Now, no, we're not talking about legal issues.
I hear you.
We're talking about interpretive issues.
Right.
It becomes common property. And there's a lot to be said for that point of view. I don't know how many times I've read Hamlet or seen Hamlet. Mm-hmm. But I remember specifically a more recent time where the scene where the uncle is praying and realizes his prayers are for naught because he will not give up the fruits of his sin. Mm-hmm. He's not going to admit it. He's not going to give up the woman he married as a result of murdering his brother. He's not going to give up the throne. Mm-hmm. And so there's a certain, like, what am I doing here? Mm-hmm. And at that moment, reading at that time, or he's seeing at that time, whatever, I felt a different kind of compassion for that character that was new, right? So I never had experienced that before, mm-hmm. which is, to me, the mark of well-written literature. A well-written play, a well-written novel, a well-written short story, you come back to it later and there's something else that you didn't see before. Why? Because it's about us and we're not simple. Right.
And so that's where some people, I think you still, as the author, even original work reveals in your recollection or rereading or your introduction of the work, it's still new details. It still converts your imagery to a new space and a new level. Even back to that previous comment, I noticed there's some artists that will not release certain things because they say, this one is for me. I made this art, yes, but I don't want to hear anybody else's interpretation. I don't want to hear anybody else trying to figure out what I'm feeling. In fact, movie Finding Forrester, Sean Connery's character.
Yeah.
And he's like, I am tired of hearing what people try to say what I am saying. I wrote what I am saying, and I don't want to hear anybody else's interpretation of it, so I'm not going to write any more books. Because I don't write for them. I write for me. I write for what I intend to portray. And everybody else's interpretation, I really don't care for as the author of said work. And so I sometimes even agree with that. Some things should not be published almost artistically, so that way you're not subject to the perversion and or even the I hate to say it, just the capturing and running off with things that don't need to be ran off with. Like, what am I trying to say? It's not about what am I trying to say. It's what about I didn't say it, so don't say it for me.
Price of admission. That's all I would say to that, is that's the
true.
Price of admission. If you want to be in the arts, well, if you want to do anything.
Yep, there we go.
then you're going to have to bump into the reality that people are going to react to it. Yeah, they're going to react to it in various different ways. I remember when I was in my 20s and decided I wanted to play bebop, liked bebop, Charlie Parker's music. And that's where Stephen Fulton and I started playing together, along with Lynn Seaton and Rich Thompson, all fantastic musicians. And for that to be the first band I spent a lot of time in, I can't tell you how much that may have, because I got run around the block quite a bit by that band. They were serious musicians. They wanted to play, and they wanted to play serious music, and they wanted to play it well. They wanted to rehearse all the time. It's like, it was skill building, to put it bluntly. And I would wish that for everyone. But even so, when we were doing that music was thought of as old hat. Most people were playing fusion, which would eventually morph into smooth jazz, right? And they were playing it because it was easier to sell. It was difficult to sell what we were trying to do, although we managed to keep the band working. Basically, from the time I graduated from University of Oklahoma in 1970, I finished my courses in the fall of 78 and then walked in 79. From basically the spring of 79 until 1994, some version of that band continued.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it was Oleo at first, and then eventually it became the Stephen Fulton Band, and then it became the Morris and Elms Band. And typically it was either, it was usually a quartet, horn, piano, bass, drums, with very obviously reshuffling members. And then when I moved to Iowa in 1994, that was the end of that. And then when I came down here in 1997, I've worked more as a sideman, although I do have my own projects from time to time. Where was I going to go with all that? We were just talking about...
Well, we were artistry and maybe like things that they do for themselves versus others.
Oh, yeah. What I remember was consistently hearing from my peers, why are you into this old stuff? Why are you listening to Oscar Peterson instead of Chick Corea, for instance? Or Bud Powell instead of Chick Corea? I ran into it with students would come to me to want to learn how to play jazz. And I would show them. I remember one student particularly saying, well, yeah, I mean, I really know how Bud Powell's music works, and that's where I start with that kind of thing. Or if you want to start earlier, we can start with, Nat Cole, Basie, whoever. And this one student said, oh, yeah, I see. You got to learn that stuff before you understand what's going on now. And it's like, we never had a lesson.
Yeah.
Not because I wasn't willing to try to teach him. He just wasn't interested. If I was going to make him go through all that old stuff. One of my students told me about taking a class on stride piano. Not taking a class on stride piano, taking a class on the stride piano era, where all the piano players played essentially a boom, chick, boom, chick, boom, chick beat in their left hand. And she loved it because she'd done lots of classic Broadway shows where that is the standard thing.
Right.
She said a lot of her peers who were much more interested in modern jazz were bored silly by the class. They couldn't hear past the surface judgment that it was dated.
Man.
Oh, well, yeah. And by the way, I've run into that all over the place. I remember a woman, I'm not going to call her name or anything like that. I don't know where she is now, what's going on with her. But there were gaps in the way she played. And a lot of it had to do with what she was listening to.
Right.
She wouldn't listen to anything that was not exceptional fidelity. And now we're talking about, 1980s. So, I mean, Kind of Blue was not a high fidelity album, by her judgment.
Oh, wow.
Right? So, her concept was of swing was whatever she'd learned from playing with other musicians in that area, not what's on the recordings by Philly Joe Jones,
Right.
or by Jimmy Cobb, those people. And that was or for that matter, Cozy Cole, but she's not listening to any of that. So it's not there. All right. You can't play what you haven't heard.
That's a good perspective because whatever as I'm pulling in wisdom and quotes and things like that, one of my favorite is a John Maxwell quote that then my pastor James Jacobs would say, leader is exposure expands you. Is that whatever you are exposed to then opens your eyes to as a tool or as an aspiration to even use or employ in your repertoire. Like half the time, if we even talk back going to collegiate studies and jazz studies and things like that, we would always sit down and talk about, you may not play this, but you need to know it to know, kind of like what Butch says, you need to know what inspired me to play it, or what vocabulary built up this understanding to play. There was this one day that I sat in a lesson and we just worked on the 6-stroke roll. And I'm like, this is so odd in my approach to it. I've done 5-stroke rolls, 7-stroke rolls. 7's much more my expression. But the 6-stroke roll got really weird. I'm like, why am I learning this? He says, because you've heard it a million times, you didn't know it. And I'm like, what do you mean? He says, now put the entry level on your tom, but the rest is on the snare. Congratulations, you're in the Motown intro.
Did you hear it when he said that?
As soon as that first time hit, I almost broke down. Like, oh my gosh, like just, wow. How much have I heard and appreciated and loved the sound? But because I did not give it justice in the foundational rudiment, literally, of it, that I assumed its negligibility.
Or you just didn't know what it was. I mean, you don't need to necessarily beat yourself up about it. I mean, it's like learning new words.
Yeah.
I mean, tell a story on myself. Superfluous. Cool word. Means like probably not that necessary. Extra decoration. When I first read it, I pronounced it superfluous.
That feels more appropriate to say.
Well, yeah, it was easier. It's easier to say than superfluous. But I mean, when I'm on a date with a young woman, right? And I said it, and she laughed, and then she told me what the pronunciation was. She didn't think I was ignorant or anything like that. But this is a problem, for instance, if you're a reader in a small town, right? Lots and lots of words like that I didn't know how to pronounce and didn't quite understand how to use a dictionary. One of the things I love about the internet now is that how do I pronounce blah, blah, blah? And you can look it up and find out.
Right.
Of course, people still mispronounce things terribly, but no,
But I think that we had a linguistic conversation at some point about where our formations, even how we talk, we are convinced in our wiring of our speech that everything is filtered through it. It's like whatever the word is, it still comes from, just moving up my diction and just changing it and everything. So if I say superfluous, it's still the same. I still put the emphasis on it, but it's different. But so I've wired it.
You sound like some of my relatives. You sound like some of the people I know in Oklahoma.
He perked all the way up. Like, wait a minute, how did you channel them? But it sometimes is even in our diction that it's like I said, it's literally filtered through it, that our expressions are limited because we haven't even imagined how we engineer what we say or sound like. Because I think that really changed me in education, is that not just like that I knew something, but I knew the way how I present it could be modified as well. It's not so much of that I know something, is that the actual presentation of what I know can be a modifier.
Absolutely. Sure.
That's why I even enjoyed, like, even on last episode, check out last episode, we talked about even oration. And we get to the place of oration, it's like half the time it's because of the dynamic, it's because of the cadence, it's because of the vowel pronunciation. One of my favorite, there's an episode on The Cosby Show where you mentioned Shakespeare. They brought in all Shakespearean actors for this scene, and they're in the show, they're all friends of the grandfather, and they taught at the university, but they all taught English and Shakespeare, and they were all trained, and they quoted Julius Caesar, and they were doing monologues individually, but the crazy part is that they were each individually their own, but each individually Shakespearean trained and beautifully eloquent. However, they flowed in and out of accent. They flowed in and out of approach because of the school they came from, quite literally. And it just really highlighted their excellence as educators within the television show, and especially as thespians that worked on the show.
There's some interviews with Richard Burton where he's talking about his Shakespearean training. And he was a poor kid, son of miners in Wales. Mm-hmm. No way he should wound up being a Shakespearean actor. And as a matter of fact, because he came from a family of miners, there was a part of him that never was comfortable with the idea that he was making all this money running around in tights quoting poetry. It wasn't a manly thing to do, you know.
I'm getting a flashback from the movie Zoolander.
In any case, but he clearly found out how to use his voice. His voice is absolutely hypnotic. A perfect example is there's a recording of him later in life doing the song Camelot, and he speaks part of it and sings part of it. And it's beautiful. It's hypnotic. It's moving. It's incredible. He give him the right kind of speech in the right kind of scene, and he'll bring the house down. I don't like all of his acting. I find some of his acting kind of mannered and less believable. When you give him the right stuff to do, especially if it allows him to dig into that voice of his,
yes,
and all of that majestic aspect of it. You know. Anyway, we took a short little pause there, and I was thinking about where Justin started with the question of what is wisdom. And one of the things I remember, strangely enough, I know exactly where this quote came from. I know it's not original to the show, but I saw it on an episode of Hill Street Blues, which was a cop show. Mm-hmm. Good cop show. Life is what happens to you while you're waiting for your life to happen. Or experience is what happens to you while you're waiting for the life that you plan to happen. Mm-hmm. Right? And it's something to that effect. I can't remember exactly how they put it. But, you know,
there's a similar quote, and I may butcher it myself, where a man has two lives, and the second one begins when he realizes the first one is the only one he has.
I just finished reading a really neat book, and I'll have to put the name and the title in the comments. It's about a woman who had a stroke, who was an art teacher, exhibiting artist, and the stroke was so bad that it crippled her right arm. She still can't use it to this day. But she was an artist, and somehow she sensed that drawing was going to be the thing that led her recovery. And so once she could get a hold of a pencil, she started drawing all the time. And then,
so she was not an artist before the...
No, she was.
Okay.
She was a visual artist.
Okay.
But she knew that was going to be, because they were giving her the worst possible diagnosis of her situation. They said, you're probably never going to walk again. She is walking. You probably won't be teaching art again. She is teaching, right? But what got her there was this absolute dogged determination that this is the thing I'm able to do. I can doodle. I can make pictures. I'm just going to keep doing this because some part of her, and this was her wisdom in the moment. Some part of her realized this is at the core of who you are, and it's going to pull you out of this hole you're in. And it's a beautiful book. Like I said, I will post in the comments the title of this book and the author's name because I can't remember it. She eventually studied sumi, which is a Japanese form of art, SUMI-E. That's where it's derived. It's Chinese originally. The name I give is the Japanese name of it. And it's derived from the calligraphy in Asia, Chinese, Japanese, Korean calligraphy, where you learn to write with a brush rather than a pen, and you hold the brush straight up and down rather than the way we would think of holding a brush or the way we would think of holding a pencil. It's neither one of those. It's a very different kind of motion, and you move the arm a lot more. Well, she learned that with her left hand, with her non-dominant hand, and studied in Asia and has exhibited in China and Japan and has won awards. So we're talking about an American woman who adopted this art form as her means of reclaiming her second life, or claiming her second life, I should say. That's exactly what you said. It's a really moving book, and it really spoke to me because I have a brother who had a stroke in 2001, and I watched him reclaim his life. I think he would really enjoy this book, so I'm thinking about getting a copy for him as well.
Well, I've heard wisdom also described as, well, there's two things, where knowledge is knowing a thing, knowing what it is, maybe even knowing where it came from, information. But wisdom is knowing what to do with it.
I just read a Bruce Lee quote that I have loved and have misquoted many, many times. He said, "I am not worried about the man who's practiced 10,000 different kicks one time. I'm worried about the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times." In other words, the guy who's gone through the book and studied every single technique, and maybe they can do them all. What level of understanding do they really have of them all? It's a very surface level understanding. The guy who said, this one technique, I'm going to grab this, and I will learn it until I'm sick of it. If you're interested in acquiring a skill, that is wisdom. Find out how much you can do with one thing, right? How many different ways you can use it, right?
I mean, now we're having almost like a wisdom quote off or whatever in a good way. Freddie Mendoza challenged us in a way of a good player plays until they get it right, but an excellent player plays until they can't get it wrong.
See, and I heard that from Keith Winking. So they both heard it from somebody else.
They definitely they were quoting together. They were and they were challenging us to stop just trying to practice until you get it right. Is almost every time you play it, you almost don't know how to get it wrong because it's so ingrained in you. Because half the time, and I take that even with our conversation, is that half the time a lot of people just try to attain a pinnacle of understanding, but then they don't know what to do with the understanding they've learned. Even going back to an even earlier conversation, even with education, they've learned so much. They got it. They got their degrees. I'm now a doctor of so on and so on, such and such. But they use that to simply maintain what they've attained and not use that where it needs to be utilized. Because if you got a doctorate, let's just say in anthropology, some people use that to simply teach anthropology.
Right.
But did you actually use that to better the anthros?
Yeah, did you actually go out? How much field research
How
did
much
you actually
field
do?
research have you done? How much advancing of the field have you done? How much have you put a staple on what you've accomplished?
It's a common complaint about academia that has some merit, and that is that in comes an undergraduate, he gets his undergraduate degree, then he goes to another university, he gets his master's degree, he goes to another university, he gets his doctorate, and then gets a position in the university and begins teaching what he's been taught without ever having any kind of field experience.
Right.
This comes up in music. People who've never worked as professional musicians in the field which they're supposed to be, proficient in. Opera singers who've never really sung operas other than college productions.
Right.
Right. Now, that is changing. right? I mean, more and more I'm seeing. What I saw at Texas State was more and more the people that were coming in were people who had ridiculous professional credentials.
Yes.
Right. Butch Miles being a good case, but
Right.
but some of the some of the singers who came in as well in the vocal department had massive credentials in terms of performance.
I want to congratulate, if I may, a contemporary of mine who is a Grammy-nominated educator, Miss Cody Raven Morris.
Oh, she's awesome. I had her.
awesome.
I had her in University Seminar and Intro to Fine Arts as well.
And I am so proud of how she could have simply gone the route of you get your education, you go teach, and you just go teach. But she hasn't just taught. She has literally pioneered techniques and energizing practices that have changed entire cultures of regions that they're calling her now in around the country, especially when she's in the Pacific Northwest right now, which is a land that is always could use some more seasoning. I'll say it that way. And I am so proud of how she did not keep in that route of academia and even musical academia, because sometimes I see a lot of people just churning out educators and educators and educators to simply educate the educators. They just want to be a teacher, so they just go be a teacher to the teachers, and that's all we do is just essentially perpetuate a certain cyclical prison of educators. Which brings me to a quick tangent, is that I had a student teacher when I was teaching, and she was wrapping up her internship, and we gave some time for her to say her goodbyes and her thank yous to the students. Thank you, you've taught me so much, so I can go be a teacher. And I said, well, let's have a little bit of moment of honesty, because y'all are students, she's going to be a teacher. Can y'all give her any advice that you would appreciate a teacher to know? And they started opening up their mouths as students. And one of them, I'll never forget, they said, could you try not to be a Texas State teacher? I said, oh, what do you mean by that? They said, okay, at this school, we get a lot of interns. We get a lot of turnaround. We know that there's student teachers pretty much in every other class, but they all just do the book thing. And they don't know who we are. They don't really understand our strengths. You're a good teacher according to your teacher, but you weren't a good teacher according to the student. These are the kids talking. I didn't say this. And they said, and this is them, and so I'm not trying to be braggadocious on this one, but they said, but Mr. Payne helped you because he knows us. He knows our tendencies. He's had conversations about our day to make sure that we're in a space to learn. Use that. So that way you're not just a Texas State teacher, but you're an effective teacher. I said that because I've seen Cody go and just impact so many lives on how they even surprise her with happy birthday, because of she'll just be in a random location and they know that she's there, and that choir will sing happy birthday because of the impact that she's made in another place, in another time, sowing seeds of life-changing educational space. And so I need to, kind of tip my hat and give her flowers on that one. Absolutely.
Yeah, it goes beyond music too. I remember at one point she was promoting a discussion group on Facebook to talk about social issues, and I was really impressed with how she handled it. So, yeah.
Because wisdom is, even moving into social issues, everyone will disagree as long as they are so focused on their emotional appeasement. Whatever.
Sure.
Yeah. Everyone will disagree as long as they're so focused on their emotional appeasement, and as long as whatever's happening to me, I am okay with. However, I have learned the secret to living life is to living life in every aspect of it. Not just finding one place and existing, but being yourself in the middle of nowhere, but then also being yourself and finding yourself and knowing what yourself is in the middle of everything. Like, you're from Oklahoma, but your brother is now in New York. from the same household, those are two majorly different areas.
Oh yeah.
Of existence, but you're still in Elms. You're still from the same foundations, same Lego pieces y'all played with, but you've had to assemble them differently because then you understand the pictures got to be a different composition. And oftentimes, I realize that a lot of people will always disagree when they haven't maybe even taken a mile in someone else's shoes or even walked a mile outside of where they normally stay. Assuming that where they normally stay, if it's their intellectual capacities or emotional capacities or even job outlooks and things like that regarding their provisions, is they don't know what they don't know.
Sure.
There's this beautiful TikTok thing I see where it's a Korean couple. Their daughter is almost like a master chef. I don't know if she's a master chef, but she looks like one because of all these recipes she gets from all different kinds of cuisines. And they just subject themselves to whatever she wants to cook for them. They're from Korea. They love the Korean food. But then she's like, okay, here's some Texas barbecue brisket. And she did the recipe and really did it well. And they're like, oh, this is incredible. Or then here's some birria tacos. And then they'll give them that. And then they'll even have some fun of not only eating it and enjoying the cuisine, but then taking that taco and putting in kimchi on it. Right? Sure. Combining their flavors. But yeah.
I want my spices on it too. There's also a bunch of videos, interesting videos where they take food, like Irish people trying, food in Texas, or one of my favorites is 3 Italian grandmothers trying the food at Olive Garden.
Oh no, no! I had a student that was from Italy, and we said we're gonna go to Olive Garden. He's like, I can't tell my dad that I went to Olive Garden. He'll disown me.
Oh my goodness!
Or even young British boys trying American food.
Yeah.
And so, like, this is Southern biscuits and gravy. They look at it, this is a scone. This is not even a biscuit. This is a scone. Why would they even call this a bit? Like, they'll just continue to just rap on about, this is not a biscuit. But then they try it and they're like, I will take it. I will take this any day of my life.
The recipe's a little different. Having worked as a baker with my wife in the Love Light Bakery in Norman, scones aren't biscuits, but they're very similar. There's a difference in the flour, the way you process the flour. I think scones typically have like a flour that's got butter chopped up in it. But anyway,
and I think that's the whole point. Is to anyone that's essentially one would know. Let's just say one would know the difference between scones, biscuits, cookies, cakes, in a simple sense of what is in them, but the wisdom to know when and where and how to utilize that is something that is always, I think what you said earlier is truly passed down. If you approach something and saying, this is what it is, congratulations, but you then need to still be taught how to use it.
Yeah.
Kind of like I see a set table. You may know this is a 7-course meal. That's a fork, that's a fork, that's a fork, that's a fork. But you don't know which fork when.
You watch other people.
And that's still wisdom.
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. Yes, absolutely.
So if a question would be, what was something that you observed that changed your life that you use?
Observed.
Yes.
Not somebody telling you something.
Not someone telling you something.
Observed. Okay, I observed this. It was not spoken to me, but it was spoken to someone else, and I grabbed it.
Right.
Does that count?
Yes.
Okay. This is a shout out to Stephen Fulton. He was leading a band, and David Stewart was playing saxophone, and they were sitting in the front. I was in the piano, and I think we had bass and drums. We were playing this job, and David went for something on the saxophone in the upper register and splattered it all over the place, right? And on the break or whatever, he was talking to him, or maybe while something else was going on, I don't know, but I heard him talking. And he said to David, look, when you go fishing, go low. that really made an impression on me at the time. And then just recently, I had to lead a song in church, and I could sing it fine in B flat. And part of me said, you should probably drop it down to A flat. It'll be easier. And I'm like, it's not that important. I should have dropped it down to A flat. I got through it, but I made some mistakes, garbled up some words because I'm worried about,
just actually
the tessitura.
Yeah.
And that's a fancy word that means where most of the notes are. Right. If the tessitura for my voice, it would have been better in A flat instead of B flat.
Right.
I didn't listen to that inner voice, and I wound up having to fish a little bit in the upper register, which made me think of that.
Right.
So that's one.
That's a good one.
That I remember specifically that has stayed with me, and that I would consider wisdom. And that's, if you're going to experiment publicly in music, at least, the bass player's dictum is stay low and keep moving. Bass players can get away. If they're playing a moving part, they can get away with a wrong note here and there because it's so low you may not notice it.
Right.
It may be gone before the next right note comes up. But if you're a lead trumpet player and you're missing stuff, right, or if you're the soloist and you're playing high and you're missing stuff, right?
That's true.
If you're the soprano in the choir and you're missing that top note, you can make everything sound kind of weird. So,
Who's changed this to minor? Huh? Okay.
right, exactly. Everybody should sing their part. Everybody should play their part. And it all should be as correct. There's a great video out there where somebody shows what happens when a band plays 100% correctly. Now, here's 90% correctly, here's 80% correctly, and here's 70% correctly. 70% correctly, supposedly still passing. And it's unlistenable.
Huh.
When they're making like one mistake out of every 10 notes, they're playing 3 wrong. In other words.
Right.
So, yeah, the music's a very exacting taskmaster. What's an example of something that you observed? Asking you the same question.
I would say quietness. Observing how to be quiet when presented with a very emotionally heightened situation. Let's say someone has got a major disagreement with you, or and they want to accuse or charge or things like that. And I observed, I think it was my mother or my father. I think it was my mother. And they were saying something that even I knew as a young person, probably a teenager, that they were just outright wrong. But she didn't say anything. She just... And at the end, I think all she said was, okay. And I thought about it because I was just watching it happen to my mother, and all the things that I would have said as a young person. I'm like, that's wrong. What are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. Get out of... But I just saw that there was also so much more peace in not responding, of knowing sometimes, like, the more they talked, the more they made themselves look like a fool. As the proverb would say, it's better to be thought of a fool with your mouth quiet than to open your mouth and prove everybody right.
I was just thinking of the same quote.
And I'm learning more and more to incorporate that into practice. I'm not saying I've got it all the time. I still have plenty of room in my foot with my mouth, but I've learned that more and more, how important it is to just let people say what they say, especially in my position of, let's just say, even being as involved as I am at a church. There are so many people who have an opinion about what, I'm just